ways we need to be a little more careful to distinguish, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, so first of all, we don't all look the same, okay? So that's,
right.
I think I wish people could appreciate that.
Yeah.
And, just an example, like when you talk to an Asian person and you want to know more about them, the stereotype is someone will ask, where are you from? Talking to either a Korean American, Asian American, and of course they're going to say America or whatever, but, I'm thinking, so rather than being lazy like that, it's saying, okay, so what's your Asian heritage perhaps? With just recognizing that Asians make up America as well, and so
That's right.
even though there's, and so yeah, recognizing that.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
Food, just think about the food. I mean, there are all different kinds of foods, and I was just and we got to recognize that they're all different, and that a lot of it is good. And so just right there tells you that there are a lot of differences.
Yeah.
I know, like, interacting with my Chinese and Japanese friends, and they all take pride in their heritage, and so it can be insulting, not really, but it can be insulting if you call a Korean a Chinese or Chinese Korean or whatever. So yeah, it's just being sensitive that there are a lot of differences still, even if we do all kind of look very similar, even though we shouldn't say that as well. So it's navigating that and being sensitive to and recognizing that, yeah, we are slightly different.
Yeah, it's helpful. It's very helpful. So, so what advice then, thinking about, just again, you kind of just did it, like you gave us a very specific advice. Just go ahead and ask, what is your Asian heritage, or lineage or whatever. Give us some other advice. How would a person who's not, say Korean American, what are ways that we can be more more accommodating, and particularly since it's our desire to do that as a Christian.
Yeah, so I was thinking about something like along those lines, and just for example, right now in the country we're dealing with like foreign powers and influences, and China being one of them.
Yeah.
And so we can complain about China in front of Chinese people that are here in America, and we may not recognize that that may not make them feel very good. So in one way, perhaps we could, when we're talking or complaining about China's overreach or influence, we could refer to it as communist China. Just like, we're Catholic, but we also are able to distinguish there are Roman Catholics and then Catholics. So maybe recognizing that there are other Asians and Chinese Americans when we're complaining about China, which, I do too, we can think or recognize that it's actually perhaps better to say communist China that we're complaining about.
Yeah, something like that. Anything else?
Can't think of anything else. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Let's see here. Well, let's put this a little bit. In fact, you just kind of segued there a little bit. Obviously, we're talking about this topic not in a vacuum. We're not, holed out in a fortress church here. We are part of a community, a society where there's a rabid race conversation going on that's been deeply politicized. It's that very politicization that tends to overgeneralize, and all of a sudden, I guess I'm just going to kind of throw your softball here, and you can go any direction you want. But just what would be what are your thoughts about the way race and the racial tension? What are your thoughts about the way that's working out in America right now? Both critical thoughts or positive thoughts, either way you want to go. I have no agenda, but just, how do you, as a person, now also as a pastor, but how do you feel about the way the racial conversation is going on in America? And what are some of the issues that you might want to speak to?
There's a lot. We've had to have this conversation in our own church, a family. I've worked through a lot of it. But to start off, I guess I'm kind of a laid-back person. So I can work with stereotypes, but I could also be sensitive, knowing that if I'm going to deal with stereotypes, then I have to be sensitive to people at the same time. And if I get caught out or if I offend, then I need to be quick to apologize as well. So if you're going to work with stereotypes, then you have to be at least sensitive to that. So
What do you mean, sensitive to, why would you need to be sensitive? Just help us.
Oh, okay, so just because of the culture, everyone is more sensitive to not just people's feelings, but the different cultures. And I think that's a good thing. But at the same time, we're all deeply flawed and sinful in the sense that we don't like the other, especially if they're very different from us. And so I recognize that, and that's, I wish people wouldn't have to, when they get into some kind of altercation or disagreement, automatically start thinking about all the differences in their anger. I think that's something that just is common to human nature. So everyone, in a sense, is racist. They can be like that. They can have those tendencies. So that's the other thing. On one hand, I'm pretty laid back. Again, I can work with stereotypes. I can joke around. But on the other hand, society has gotten pretty hypersensitive to everything, and so you've got to be careful. And at the same time, as Christians, we have to recognize that there is that sinful bent to us. Non-Christians, they're not going to care that if they have an altercation with someone, that immediately in their minds they can start thinking of all the curse words, but also
You're the evil person, I'm the righteous person.
Yeah,
Is that what you're getting at?
that's right. And race could be a part of that.
Yeah.
That could always be a part of it. But as Christians, we need to recognize that we're first made in the image of God, and so we don't want to bring race into it. We don't want to sin, but we don't want to bring race into it in our sinfulness either. So, yeah.
So I kind of hear you between the lines saying, as a Christian, you're trying to be humble. And even if you want to recognize the fact that there are real issues that need to be discussed, but just trying to be humble, not to be too quick to judge. Is that the summary of what you just said, or not?
Yeah. So when it comes to like racist intent and the heart motives, that we don't want to be quick to judge. We don't want to bring race into blame. We want to be able to appreciate the differences, but not use it as sin.
Okay. I heard someone once say, this kind of gets just feeding off of what you said a little bit, that I'm a brown skin who's lived in a black-white America. I.e., so much of the racial conversation in America, and we can at least appreciate to some degree why, given the history of America and slavery and failed Reconstruction, all that kind of stuff. So I would imagine being a Korean American, or even broadly speaking, Asian American, Indian, whatever. How do you relate to that? In other words, how much of the discussion is predominant in our culture? Do you feel left out of that discussion? Do you feel somehow that the discussion doesn't speak to your issues the way you experience as a Korean American? How would you interact with that question?
Yeah. So one example might be the reverse discrimination against Asian Americans, like in terms of college admissions, for example. It's big on my Facebook feeds because of the high school that I go to. They're dealing with that, or that I went to. They were dealing with that kind of stuff, and so and my son, he applied to schools and he didn't get into certain schools, and you just can't help but think about, okay, could it be because he's an Asian male, and so there's a quota or something like that. There are thoughts like that happen all the time, and so but at the same time, for me and those in my circles as Asians and Korean Americans especially, we've done fairly well for ourselves in society, and so we don't have a lot of the same issues as like the Black African American experience and the plight and the history there. And so personally, I am much more sympathetic and compassionate, and I'm okay that that we are that silent minority and that we get overlooked. And I don't. That's partly because of my faith, but also partly because historically we've just been able to do better. We haven't had the kind of difficulties. Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, I know there are going to be a lot of questions, and we can interact with you more. But I'm just going to, my last question just basically is, now speaking to you as a pastor, I'm going to ask you to shepherd us a little bit. How would you advise this church as Christians? How would you advise all of us? Is there a passage of scripture that you might turn to and say, this has been a particularly relevant passage for you and your, sort of ministry concerning racism. You can go with that wherever you want to go, but just kind of, give us your thoughts on how we as Christians, particularly, if there's just advice or thoughts that you would speak to us about.
Okay, well, first of all, so thank you for having me here. And I was just sharing my experience, but now that you're asking me to speak more into people's lives, just want to say thank you for listening and for being gracious to allow me to be here. So with that, then, I have two passages in mind that one of them I shared with our church congregation when we started our own conversation on race, and that was just the parable of the Good Samaritan. But what I really love about that parable is right before it, in chapter 9, in verse 51, that's where Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem, chapter 9:51, in Luke 9:51. But then right after that, they go into a Samaritan town, and James and John, they're angry because the Samaritans have rejected Jesus. And so they ask Jesus, can we throw down fire on this town? And Jesus rebukes them, and they move on. And then just, a couple of verses later, you get the parable of the Good Samaritan, where you just get a sense of radical love that is being shown. And it transcends ceremonial law and religious practices and religious devotion. And I think that's what the gospel really is all about. It's a radical, other person-centered love. So Luke 10, parable of the Good Samaritan, that's just huge.
In a race at that time that was severely hated.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah. So, one thing we have to be careful of is when I shared this, there were concerns that I talked about love, and the concerns were that the world and society uses love and they throw it around, and they just almost emptied it of its meaning. And so, but no, I'm talking about a radical, other person-centered, a Jesus cross-shaped kind of love. And so the other passage that I would think about and talk about, which actually I'm preparing for this Sunday, not for race, but for fellowship reasons, is Romans 15, where it's welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. And if you look at that first section in Romans 15, 1-7, it is just, it's all, Paul actually he rates people's faith. He says you're either strong or weak in faith. And the strong in faith are the ones who can give up their rights. Yep. They're the ones who won't please themselves, but seek to please the other. That's big, and that's hard to do. And we could always, I guess, think about and justify ourselves with our theology, and we can say, no, we can't talk about these kind of things because that's not of the gospel. But of course, we want to maintain righteousness and work and avoid sin. But being able to care for the other person more than yourself, that's the radical cross-shaped love that I think that all Christians, we need to recapture that a little bit more. Yeah.
Imagine that two parties who would be tempted to be in animosity with each other both practice that. There would almost be a reverse competition.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Where each is giving to the other sacrificially, any kind of hostility would be dissolved immediately.
Yeah.
But someone's got to break the cycle, don't they?
That's right.
So Christians should do it. Thank you, brother. That's really well said. I'm glad you took us that passage. So, guys, you're fortunate. We got about 30 full minutes here. Half the time is going to now be just an open conversation with Pastor Jang. And like I did last week, I'm going to be sensitive to the fact that we've got a lot more people on Zoom than we have here. So I'm going to bias a little bit more in that, but I want you guys here to certainly speak into it. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and give somebody here the first opportunity, and then I'm going to give a 2 or 3 maybe to the Zoom, then I'm going to come back and we'll work it that way, okay? Just so you know why I did that when you think, why is it picking on them, not me? Yeah, so that's the reason. So with that, open it up. All right. I don't know. There were 2 people very, very fast. I'm going to let you in the back and then you in the front. Both of you kind of hit it at the same time, maybe a little before back there. So let's go.
The cross-shaped love, I love
Mike.
that phrase.
Oh boy. The same mic that I have? Does that need? Excuse me. Where's his mic? If I could, well, he's going to be interacting, so I'll repeat the question. I'll just have to do that.
Open conversation. I didn't have a question. I just had like a comment,
Oh.
but.
Say it as loud as you can.
Huh?
Say it as loud as you can, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say, the cross-shaped love, it's not a question, I just wanted to say, I really love that concept. And I came to the Lord at 27, and so that's 3 years ago now. And I felt desperate for love before I knew Christ. And in that desperation, I connected with people a lot, because I wanted love deeper. And then when I came to know Christ, I didn't need people as much. And so then I struggled with loving, and I'm still, I think, in that phase where, thank you. So I didn't need people's love as much because I was finding it from the Lord. And then I experienced what I think might be called self-righteousness, where I didn't really need it from other people. And so I guess I think a predicament we find ourselves in as Christians is we have to, what are the intentions that we seek the Lord? I think we're so self-serving, because we want to feel okay and at peace. And there has to come a time, I think, where we have to, that His love has to be enough and it fills our cup and then it pours over. So I think we're kind of battling with that. And then, the two sides, I think, hate each other so much because they want love. Their intention is love, and they're frustrated, So it comes out as hatred, but I think it's a hunger for love,
Thank you.
So I think as Christians, just I pray that we can get over this hump where we're taking so much of His love, and it can fill, so we can be the difference that the world is looking for, But,
Thank you. Why don't we just go and give it to her, and let's keep our questions pretty short because we want to let everybody get in here as possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, my name is Elisa, and I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Korean American, like you. I feel like you're my people. Very similar experience growing up, born actually in Canadian, but similar growing up experience, predominantly white community. Didn't really meet Asians until I went to college in upstate New York, where I probably met most of your friends who are from Stuyvesant, or Bronx Nines, or whichever one you went to.
Stuyvesant, that's right.
Right, so Stuy's the best, I know. But anyway, I just wanted to share whatever thoughts I had about this particular issue about Asian race issues, because obviously it's always on my mind, and I'm particularly interested in this week's topic. I think that from my experience, and after thinking about it for a long time, the issues are, feel like they're in a balance between a desire to be seen and known, and a desire not to be othered. And you've been separated. So it's kind of which one do you want? Do you want to be in or do you want to be out? So it's a balance, because I think as an Asian American or an immigrant, daughter of immigrants, child of immigrants, you grew up with some feelings of exclusion or shame. People don't like your food. Your house smells weird. Why do you look like that? Why do you talk like that? There's this feeling of not fitting in. And the second thing is you feel like there are also stereotypes. So you have to be smart. You have to be good at math. You have to have good grades. You have to play the piano. So you'll feel confined by those restraints, which are not bad, but you do feel burdened by them and need to live up to them. And then also the model minority stereotype also plays into issues of Black identity, because often the model minority is used as a way of oppressing the African American community, as we're held up as a model of, well, these people have made it, why haven't you? Which creates tension. And then also the third element is the silence, where as a culture, deference is part of showing respect, and in the Western view, it's just seen as keeping quiet and blending in and keeping your head down, and also even at times being treated as you're white, because you're white enough, you fit in enough that you don't cause any problems, so you can be included. But at the same way, that's an erasure of who you are and the difference you have, and the fact that you don't really fit in. So the answer to all those things is what the church can do. and how I have found in the similar experience of Danny that there was a really nice period of time in our lives where we wanted to just stay with our group. I found my Korean friends, my Asian American friends, and we were together and we just knew each other. There was no explaining that needed to be done. You could make fun of each other's differences. You could make fun of, you could just, everyone could know. You knew why Koreans never drove Japanese cars, because there was a war. Like, there's this stuff that you didn't have to explain to people. And there was this comfort there. And so I spent a lot of time in the Korean American church. There was a shelter there. But I do feel like I'm now in an interracial marriage of 20 years, which has totally changed everything. And had I not joined a community that was not predominantly Asian American, I don't think I would have had to find this struggle and the desire to want to have this community that knew how to see me and also not other me. So I guess my encouragement is that you would say the same thing, that we have to give ourselves the opportunity for the cross to bring us together, because ultimately that is where our identity lies. Because our safety isn't in just retreating to our group, even though for a time it may serve a purpose in discovering ourselves. But
Can I get you to speak into that?
yeah, you can definitely,
Okay.
say I'm wrong or whatever, but that's definitely, I just wanted to share that because it felt like an opportunity.
Could you speak in, kind of, maybe both aspects of that? How would you respond to that?
So I could very well not be here, in the sense that I could have pastored a Korean American church, what we call the EM church, English ministry kind of churches, and I distinctly did not want to be a part of an EM church. If they speak English, then let's be just a multi-ethnic kind of church. We don't need to stick to our own kind just because we feel more comfortable. And I know that comfort. I know that comfort very well. But I told myself, no, if I really believe the gospel, then I have to break out of that. And so that's why I'm in a multi-ethnic church. And actually, there's no other Koreans in our church. I mean, we're a very small church, but no other Koreans in our church. We're the only ones. So that's the first thing. My gospel identity had to shape me more before, or more fundamentally than my ethnic identity.
So how have you personally, as a Christian, handled some of those issues with respect to how you treat or how you interact with predominantly white Christians? Did you say one? I don't think it was. How do you handle that? I'd say this for those Zoom people because it was off. How do you handle that issue as a Korean American, but most importantly as a Christian? How do you handle that with basically the white community? How do what's your interaction with us emotionally, whatever,
Sure. So on one hand, I don't have any kind of like agenda to tutor or teach like the white folks in our church. So that's not how I operate. But on the other hand, I felt like, and I think this is more universal than just an Asian thing, I felt like I had to grow up and just gain confidence in myself. And so being able to do that meant that I could then just talk about my differences and not worry about it, not feel anything of it, but also appreciate other people's differences and point it out to them and say, oh, that's great that you're like that. So
it strikes me, and I'll just say this real quickly, but I'm looking for ways I think that we all can help each other grow as Christians. And what you just said to me, brother, is that one way that maybe an Asian American can really help a Christian be a stronger Christian, a white Christian be a stronger Christian, is just in your model, just in your example that, if you think we, quote, white Christians are struggling in our skin, and we all do to some degree feel that insecurity and shame and things like that. We all have other identities that do that, whether it's we were born on the wrong side of the track or come from the South and then you're in the North. There's all sorts of things. But you guys seem to really be able, I'm trying to say that you have a lot to teach us as, and others as an Asian American, having just what you said, I won't repeat it, is an example to me. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, also, and maybe I'm just I think ideally, but I think as an Asian American, it's like we're not in the black-white divide there, and so, but at the same time, I feel like we can speak into that,
Yeah.
where we could get the ears of both sides, actually,
Yeah.
because we are a minority, but at the same time, we haven't suffered in the way that the black community has, and so, yeah, we can minister to both
That's
camps.
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Zoom, speak right at, the first to speak gets it. Because I can't see all your hands, there's too many people there. But you speak and we'll hear it. Make sure you unmute yourself. It's okay, we don't hear you. I hear you talking barely. Yeah, I know, but we can't hear you here, which is what we could last time. Can you fix that? Hold on, Catherine, we're trying to get your, the speaker up. I'm afraid that we might have missed some other people that were trying to speak, so I apologize. We don't hear you yet. Try it again, Catherine. Nope. Oh, man.
I think it's her, to be honest. Try again.
Try it again. Okay, I want someone else to try to speak just to make sure it's not Catherine. Is somebody else trying to speak?
Is Emily, can you guys hear me at all?
Yes, we can hear Emily. Catherine, check your thing. We hear you barely for some reason.
It's her mic.
Just might be the mic.
We can hear you, but very lightly.
Why don't you chat? Why don't you use chat and you can read chat, right? I'm going to give somebody else a shot. We only have a little less than 15 minutes. I'm going to give somebody else a shot, but then keep working on your chat and maybe we can get you that way. Okay, Catherine? Sorry. Okay, someone else want to ask a question while Catherine's doing a chat or something?
I have a question.
Okay.
The dialogue that we've been having, I'm a white person, so I'm looking at reconciliation between whites and blacks or whites and Asian Americans. But I'm curious if the pastor sees dialogues going on between Asian Americans and African Americans or Asian Americans and Hispanics. So I'm just looking in one direction, but he's looking in other directions.
Okay.
I have not come across that. Yeah, I would like for our church to be more involved in that, but I personally haven't, no.
Okay. Good question. Catherine, you want to try again, or are you texting or chatting? I mean, another question from Zoom while we're waiting.
Hey, this is Camilla. Can you hear
Okay.
me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for speaking. It was really great to hear from your perspective. I had a question about your comment about your identity in Christ being more fundamental to you than your ethnic identity. I think of myself being born into the world as a Black woman. I feel like that totally formed my idea of where I fit into this world. And not to say that it's less important, but it totally, has everything to do with how I think, even how I come to Christ, how I experience my relationship with Christ in the church. So I wondered if you could tease that out a little bit more.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that is, and I need to make clear, God made us all different, and we need to appreciate that and actually embrace it and love it and work out of that, because God has us all differently so that we can actually minister to one another. And so, yeah, through your secondary ethnic identity, I guess I have to number it like that, Primary is our identity in Christ, but then, of course, we have the reality of our ethnic identity. And so from there, it's like, can we leverage that so that we can be reconcilers, peacemakers, ambassadors for Christ? So, yeah.
It's interesting. We'll cover this maybe next week, but there is, I think, there is actually a biblical way to discern priority of identity. And it starts that we're all made as image bearers. And that's the kernel of who we are, of which then we develop within redemptive history into different ethnicities. And then, of course, as a Christian, that that whole being born again idea is that we are created again. We're called new creations as to go back and rediscover who we were and are to be as image bearers. And so very clearly, to your point about Romans 14 and 15, I love that you brought that up. Romans 14 has been my go-to passage for this whole thing. And as you say, it concludes in 15 with, and therefore welcome one another. And he goes right through the promises that were given to the people of God. And so about this multinational, multi-ethnic church. And so I think that's really, would you agree with that sort of exegetical footnote? Do you think that fits what you just said?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I feel like it's just so obvious that we are made in the image of God, and yet I think we do need to keep saying that. And so, sometimes I just don't say it, but yeah, that needs to be established. Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
As
so
well.
the idea being, at least for
Made
me,
and then
it's
remade.
me talking, but whatever I do, I can't let one identity dismiss the a priori identity. And again, this is a conviction-based identity. I think to Tanella's point, which I think is well taken, our circumstantial identity, if you want to put that way, as decreed by God, so let's don't diminish that circumstantial.
Right.
But that circumstantial identity is still very important because God did decree it, and therefore I embrace it. But it's also, it's secondary. I don't like that term.
Yeah.
But, because it's just who we are. But I think it's clearly, from a conviction point of view, the gospel is meant to restore our imago Dei, the image bearer. And out of that, what would it look like then for me as a white person, circumstantially, to bear out the image of God?
Yeah.
And that's a different way of saying, I'm going to fit the image of God to my identity. I'm going to fit my identity to the image of God, which
Right.
is both important.
Yeah.
I think that's what I hear you saying. Thank you, Tanel. That's a good question.
Just along
Yeah,
those
sure.
lines, we're also, the direction and the purpose of all of that is that we're actually being remade in the image of Christ. So that's the new creation language,
right.
but our image is being remade in the image of Christ, and so that's where we can embrace our circumstantial identity, if you want to call it that way, and actually live out of that with great conviction and confidence, actually,
Yes.
despite what the world is saying and how
Right.
all the powers are at work. Yeah.
It's so refreshing to have a conversation with you in a little bit of a isolated context where we don't immediately go to I'm nervous, and I suspect even she was nervous about it saying any of this because it so quickly gets politicized, as if we're undermining it. And it just doesn't have to be that way. But anybody else there on Zoom, and then I'll zip back over here. And
I have a question,
Yeah.
if I can. So this is Trey Billings.
Husband of
We've
Lisa.
talked a lot about
My husband.
we've talked a lot about reconciliation, often in the context of relationships inside the church, right? As we try to know one another, love one another, or in the sort of broader societal context, sort of the systemic issues in our world. But I'm curious, to the extent that we represent an alternative community, we can be the aroma of Christ to those who are perishing through the way that we interact around race inside the church and outside the church. Can you talk a little bit about the way that our views on race and our interactions as multi-ethnic community of believers can actually speak to the gospel and even attract other people to the faith?
Good.
Well, I might think of it differently, how the gospel could speak into the whole situation, really. And so my personal view is that I think too many Christians are fearful. And we should be the people who should not be afraid at all. And yet I think because of all the forces that are at work in our society, they become alarmist when we should have all the confidence in the world, being rooted and grounded in Christ to be able to speak into situations. And so that's why I think we can talk about it. And if we're going to get slammed or we're going to get canceled or we take the hits, we shouldn't be surprised at that. I mean, those are the reproaches that Christ took, and so we can take it too. So I think we can be a little more daring and say things that might sound politically one-sided or not when we're actually trying to hold on to the truth, really. Because both sides have parts of the truth, and I'd like to think that we have the whole truth, and so rather than having the culture dictate what we say, that out of our confidence in Christ that we speak truth. And hopefully, over time, we'll start to see the benefits, because I know immediately it's not going to happen yet.
Okay, Catherine, I haven't forgotten about you. Are you able to speak or text? Have you done anything?
Can you guys hear me if I speak up?
Yes.
Okay, I can't, can you hear, can the speaker hear?
I can hear you,
Okay.
Catherine.
Speak real loud, and I think we can hear you over here where the speaker's sitting.
Okay, so to try to be concise, I've heard you say that African Americans struggle most in our context in America, and of course Asian Americans and other identities would struggle as well. My question is, in order to create space for the folks who are struggling, who are most oppressed, who are most acted against, how do we create space for those folks without ostracizing other folks I hate the term minorities, but people who identify as other races or ethnicities to create space for everyone while recognizing the really unique struggle of folks who identify as African American?
Yeah, well, first, I hope everyone understood what I meant by that relatively the Asian American experience in America is not the same as the African American experience. So, but in terms of making space, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's okay. You stumped them, Catherine,
Yeah.
and me too, quite frankly. I'm not sure, I'm sitting here trying to think how I'll go after that.
Danny, we have a question back
Yeah,
here.
Jefferson.
Okay, yeah, I'll turn over here.
Danny, I'm interested in knowing how you, as an Asian American, if you found aspects of the gospel or aspects of the character of Christ, of the Lord, that speak to the Asian American community, maybe in a more significant way than in the white culture or the non-Asian American culture would interpret the gospel, or aspects of characteristics of Christ that you've found to be particularly important to sharing the gospel or experiencing the gospel?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming from having experience in two different cultures, I see just the community and relational aspect of being an Asian American, and I can see that that's what Jesus wants for the church. You know, a lot more connected, relational, giving, sharing. I mean, when I think about like my father's church experience, I mean, the community they were fully there for him and for our church, our family, in a way that was pretty remarkable. They probably went overboard, but I see as like, I think that's what Jesus wants in his church body community, for sure. Yeah.
Clarify, the people who were overboard for you, they were what ethnicity?
Oh, they were Koreans. So,
Okay.
so my father's church was a Korean immigrant church.
Right.
So just to give you a little bit of background, he's been in the States for 40 years and he can't speak English very well still because
I see.
he's just been isolated with the Korean community there.
And so how would you see, say, a predominantly white church modeled after that experience?
Spending a lot more time with one another.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that is so hard because I can feel it myself, the tension that we're all time poor. And so it's even hard for me, even though like that's what I grew up with and I'm used to it. People would be showing up at our door to help my father do things and all that. And yeah, so just time.
Okay. Zoom. Question, comment from Zoom?
So I have something. This is David Boyer.
Okay.
Hey, so a lot. You mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, and I think Elisa has mentioned some of this as well. That I think it's very easy for us as quote white people to look at Asian Americans and say, "Oh, you all look the same." But when I've had the privilege of many years of working with many different Asian people of one culture or blended cultures, and different hairstyles, skin tones, whatever, and they will be very quick to say, "I am not that. I am not this." And I really appreciated your comments that overarched. The gospel is so much more important than these things. And I think to echo Tolliver's conversation from last week, it's an individual conversation, right? So like a dear friend of mine who's half Chinese and half Laotian would want to be referred to as Laotian and not Chinese, right? Or some other person might want to be referred to as Chinese versus something else and all that stuff. So can you expound a little bit about how we as a church can engage? There's so many different Asian people that come through our doors, and how do we look for these differences? Do we acknowledge these differences? Do we seek them out to engage someone alongside of the overarching gospel? Like, how important is that?
I mean, just being able to recognize that there are different cultures, even within Asian, having a family of different parents of Asian background. I mean, just being able to recognize that and appreciate it, I think right there that says we see you and we recognize you. So, yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm gonna let others speak if that's okay, and if not, I'll let you. Anybody else want to speak, or I'm gonna go to repeats?
Yes, I had a question, if I may chime in. This is really not so much about race relations, really is about thinking theologically from a global perspective in the way that different cultures can give us a bigger perspective of who God is and what the gospel means. And I remember some years ago, thinking about how much American Christianity has obviously been influenced by Western Christianity and Western theologians in the Scottish American tradition and at least in Presbyterianism. But the way that there are certain aspects of Asian culture that I remember some years ago, so much of, I feel like our tradition emphasizes the forensic nature of the gospel, the notion of guilt and justification. And never hearing from a kind of Asian perspective, the notion of shame, the notion of honor. It magnified my sort of sense of the gospel, that there are different aspects of sin and salvation that play out in different cultural forms. And I just wondered if you could comment at all on that, of ways in which American Christianity, which has been deeply influenced by essentially Western Christianity, if there's ways that Eastern Christianity could speak to us about things that would give us a bigger view of the gospel.
Yeah, I mean, shame and honor is huge, obviously, and it was probably huge in Jesus' culture too, right? In the Middle Eastern culture. But one aspect of the honor bit is that even a theory of atonement, satisfaction, because God's honor has been defiled and defamed, that is huge in terms of understanding atonement and what salvation really means. It's more than just having my sins forensically done away with, where now I'm imputed righteous, but now it's for God's honor and His name that has been so wrong that we represent. Atonement actually deals with that as well. So, yeah.
Well, that's going to precede some conversations on justice and that idea that happens, both forensically, but also, like you said, there's an identity sort of side to that. It's interesting, by the way, just on a side, a friend, which was probably on here, but I didn't want to Sposen sent me an article, I think by the Atlantic, that wants to define the South and its struggle with racism as a struggle of shame and honor. So it's real, I kind of sort of surprised me. I told him I have to get back with him. I'm still thinking through it, but it was an interesting article to that effect. Anyone else who has not had a chance to speak? We actually just ran out of time, and so actually, yeah, it's a really quick one. Otherwise, we're out of time. Can you make yours really, really quick, or not? Or you could talk with them afterwards as well if you'd like.
Yeah, I guess I could just.
Yeah, touch base offline, I guess. So we are officially done. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, brother. That was awesome, man. And you took it good. So, and thank you. You know, I just love this church. You know, isn't it great that we're able to do this? And I just feel so privileged to be a part of a church that, you know, we'd love to see it be as multicultural as our city is, but it is interesting that we have enough, at least, to where we have these honest conversations, and I really enjoyed today as I did last week.